You won't believe what happened when this white hat arrived at Kenya's biggest airport, but the moment Winnie knelt before her mother, the entire nation stopped breathing. October 16th of 2025, Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, a moment so devastating, so powerful, so historically significant that it would reduce an entire nation to tears. What you're about to witness isn't just a daughter handing her mother a hat. This is the transfer of legacy, this is the passing of an icon, and this is the moment Kenya's heart shattered into million pieces, and here is exactly what happened. Raila Amolo Odinga, the name alone carried weight across Kenya, across East Africa, and across the entire African continent. For over 4 decades now, this man was the beating heart of Kenya's democracy. Born in January 7th, 1945, the son of Kenya's first vice president, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, politics wasn't just in his blood, it was his blood. To understand why a simple white fedora could carry such emotional weight, you need to understand who Raila Odinga really was. 5 times he ran for presidency, 5 times millions of Kenyans believed this would be his moment, 5 times he claimed victory had been stolen from him. But now, that's not more important. Let's talk about the hat, because this wasn't just his accessory. A white fedora, clean, simple, very dignified. Raila wore it in his political rallies, where tens of thousands chanted his name. He wore it to parliament. He wore it to meet presidents and prime ministers. He wore it during his most triumphant moments and his most devastating defeats. Political analysts have studied that hat. Cultural experts wrote about this significance. In traditional African contexts, particularly among the Luo, people of which Raila was a proud member, hats like these were not worn by just anyone. They were symbols of elderhood, of wisdom, and symbols of leadership. They signified that the wearer carried the destiny of multitudes on their shoulders, a constant reminder to remain level-headed, to be mindful of others even when personal welfare hung in the balance. Barack Muluka, a renowned political strategist and communication expert, once explained it perfectly. The prime ministers wear the hat as a sign of elderhood and leadership. In traditional African context, the hat was not worn by anybody, but by people who had the destiny of multitudes in their hands. For over 3 decades now, whenever Kenyans saw that white fedora, they knew exactly who was wearing it. It became a visual shorthand, a symbol recognized by street vendors in Nairobi, by fishermen on Lake Victoria, even by people following the Kenyan politics casually. The hat represented more than Raila himself. It represented resilience. It represented never giving up despite 5 electoral defeats. It represented the fight for democracy. In a country that had non-dictatorship, it represented hope for millions who felt voiceless, powerless, or even forgotten. That hat had rested on Raila's head during Kenya's most pivotal moments, during the 2007-2008 post-election crisis negotiations, during 2010 constitutional reforms that reshaped Kenya's governance, during countless rallies where he rallied his supporters with the nickname they'd give him, Baba. The hat wasn't just an accessory anymore, it was an icon in itself, a relic, a piece of the living history, and now that Raila is gone, what remains of it? When Raila collapsed on the Wednesday morning, when doctors pronounced him dead, when the world started learning that one of Africa's most significant political figures had passed on, one question quietly circulated among those who knew him: what happened to the hat? In Mumbai, India, as preparations began for Raila's body to be repatriated to Kenya, photographs started appearing online. Kenyan social media exploded, and the images were haunting in their simplicity. There it was, the white fedora resting on a beige seat in what appeared to be an airport lounge, empty, waiting as if it was anticipating the journey home alongside its owner. So touching, one of Kenyans wrote online, that hat carries the spirit of a true hero. Even it's silent, it speaks of Baba's courage, love, and undenying fight for Kenya. The viral photograph was not just sad, it was devastating because everyone saw it and understood what it represented. Raila's journey was over, his campaigns were finished, and his rallies will never happen again. And that hat, the same iconic hat, the beautiful iconic Fedora hat, was now an orphan in itself. On October 16th, a delegation arrived in Mumbai. Prime Cabinet Secretary Musalia Mudavadi led the team sent by President William Samoei Ruto to bring Raila home. They met with Winnie Odinga and Ruth Odinga, and together they prepared Raila's body for its final journey. The casket was simple yet dignified, exactly like Raila himself. The Kenyan flag was draped over it with solemn ceremony, and then Winnie did something that would become one of the most photographed moments of the entire mourning period. She took her father's white fedora and she placed it carefully at the head of the casket. The Kenyan Airways flight carrying Raila's body was renamed RAO 001 in his honor. Inside that aircraft, according to multiple reports, the hat was given its own seat for the entire journey, not packed away, not stored in a luggage, seated as if Raila's spirit traveled alongside his physical remains. Can you imagine that particular moment? Can you picture Winnie Odinga sitting on that flight, glancing over at an empty seat, and that white fedora, knowing that her father, the man who shaped not just her life but the life of an entire nation, was making his final trip home? 9:36 a.m. East African Time, October 16th, 2025. Flight RAO 001 touched down at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, and what happened next, what Winnie did when she stepped off that plane, is where the story gets even more emotional. The airport had been locked down, military personnel surrounded the tarmac, police officers stood at attention as President William Samoei Ruto was there. Former President Uhuru Kenyatta was also there, and the Deputy President Kindiki Kithure, Senate Speaker Amason Kingi, the entire political elite of Kenya had gathered. But more importantly, so had the people of Kenya. Thousands of ordinary Kenyans flooded the JKIA airport. They lined up the roads, they pressed against barriers, they climbed onto the vehicles to get a better view. Security struggled to contain the crowds. The chants of Joey, the traditional Luo lament, filled the air with people weeping openly. When the cargo door of the aircraft opened, when Raila's flag-draped casket appeared, chaos erupted and mourners surged forward. Some collapsed to the ground in despair, others screamed, "Baba!" And then Winnie Odinga stepped off the plane. Her face showed quiet determination. Jungle green pants, white shirt, matching half coat, and in her hands, cradled with infinite care, her father's white fedora. Photographers captured her descent from the aircraft. The hat seemed to glow in its morning light. As she walked across the tarmac towards the VIP lounge, everyone eyed, followed that hat. It seemed to carry weight beyond its physical presence, the weight of history, of legacy, of a life that had shaped the nation. And inside the VVIP offices of JKIA, the family had gathered. Mama Ida Odinga sat waiting. She wore a black skirt, suit, a matching hat, a white blouse, and a striped scarf. Her face bore the marks of her sleepless nights and endless tears. Beside her stood Raila Jr., his expression a mixture of solemnity and barely controlled grief. Other family members filled the room. President Ruto stood ready to offer condolences, and former President Uhuru Kenyatta waited silently. A hat that traveled thousands of miles from India to Kenya. A hat that was given its own plane seat for the journey. A hat that was presented by a kneeling daughter to her grieving mother in one of the most powerful images of familial love and respect in recent Kenyan history, a hat that sat on a casket as a nation said goodbye to one of the greatest sons. Winnie Odinga's gesture, kneeling before her mother, head bowed, representing that heart, captured something universal about loss, about family, and about respect, about the symbols that connect us to those we love. When words fail, when grief is too overwhelming, when the magnitude of loss seems unbearable, sometimes all we have are symbols, objects that carry meaning beyond their physical form. And as Mama Ida held the heart in her hands, as she felt its familiar weight, as she remembered the thousands of times she'd seen it pitched on her husband's head, she held more than fabric and felt. She had held 50 years of married, she held shared struggles and victories, she held private moments and public triumphs, she held a lifetime of love, partnerships and devotion. This is the story of how the white fedora became a national symbol of grief, how the daughter's gesture became an image of devotion, how a family's private pain has become now a public moment of collective mourning. This is the story of Raila Odinga's heart and the tears that flowed when it finally came back home.